Hello, this is Christophe de Dinchin, and today I'm going to give you a quick update about DB48X, specifically about version 0.7.8, which I released yesterday. And that's a version that implements a new solver menu for built-in library equations. So we are going to see that next. But first, let me show you the version number. So that's VE RS, I hit plus for the function catalog. You go to the version command, and you see that the description is a modern implementation of reverse Polish Lisp for DM32 and DM42 calculators from Swiss Micros. So, as I said, the focus of this release is equation library and specifically a solver menu that works with them. But let me start with the relatively small things. A number of requests and bug reports from various users were fixed in this release. So the first one is that if I edit a large object like this, you see that these two keys are left and right. And if I shift that, that's down and up. Now, one of the observations from one of the DB48X users on GitHub is that if you edit a simple object, the up key was not used. And so what it does now is that it goes to the beginning of the line. It's a minor thing, but it's still pretty useful. Now, another observation from this same user is that if you hit Shift twice, this triggers, as you can see, the history menu. And now there was this concern that the 123 I typed was lost. So that's actually not the case because the history buffer is circular. So if I do that again, I'm going to go through the history of various things I typed previously. And after a while, I'm going to look back to the 123 that I was typing initially. So it's not lost. At the same time, it's not super convenient. So I'm thinking about having the history menu really shift to either a menu selection for the possible history entries or having the up and down keys being used to select which history entry you want to edit. You select one and then you hit enter to get it. So I don't know which one is going to be more practical. I'm going to do some experiments. It's not implemented yet, but expect a change there. Now, another minor bug that was noticed by another of the DB48X users was that .123 would fail to pass. This was a temporary bug, a regression compared to earlier releases. So now it passes again as 0.123. So that's pretty convenient if you do some number crunching and enter a number of decimal values like this. Another very common request was regarding complex numbers. So if I take -1 and take the square root, I get an argument outside domain, and that's expected because -1 does not have a square root in real numbers. Now, if I do that in complex numbers, so if I type -1, go to the complex menu, and then do -1 plus 0i, and then I do a square root of that, then that works. But you see that there is this auto-complex menu entry that was present but was not really doing anything. And now what it does is if it's active, then it's going to promote real numbers to complex if necessary to be able to do the computation. So in that case, you see that I get my 0 plus 1i as I expected. While we are on the topic of complex numbers, you can also enter numbers with a phase. So 10 like this, 10 with an angle of 30. And that uses the current mode for angles. So in that case, I'm using degrees. So that's displaying with degrees. Now, it might be convenient sometimes to enter with a different angle mode without changing the mode. So if I type this and type 30 again, go to the modes menu, and I select grad, for instance. Instead of shifting to grads like it used to be, it's going to simply tell me that I want to enter this number in grad. And so now if I hit enter, I get the result shown in degrees. Now if I use the command grad again, but without any data on the command line, now it's going to shift the mode. So depending on whether I'm entering a number or whether I'm simply using it as a command, the result is going to be different. So that's a quick convenience. Another thing that was a frequent request is that if I enter an equation like this, for instance, let me take the square root of x, and if I take the invert of that and then invert again, then I get my original number. So that the auto-simplify flag is now taken into account also to simplify various simple expressions like this, inv of x, negating and negating. So earlier releases would give me inv or minus minus, etc. So this is pretty convenient to keep your expressions simple, and it's under the control in the math menu of, so if I go to the math preferences, and it's under the control of the auto-simplify flag. Another thing that was relatively annoying was the display of mixed fractions for big numbers. So if I don't do something like this, if the number, the integral part, the 30 in that case, was big enough, it could actually fail to display. So that bug is fixed. Another problem was that minus sign might display twice, so it could display both in front of the number and in front of the 6. So this is fixed as well. Another request that came frequently that was to have a single command shortcut or keyboard shortcut to convert something to a number. And there is the cycle function that does that for fractions. And so I can cycle between fractional and decimal parts. So the cycle function is bound to the EEX key if you did not type a number before. If you type something, then that's the exponent entry. But if you just have a number like this, it's going to cycle between its various representations. So for instance, for complex numbers, you may remember that if I enter a number like this and I hit the cycle key, it selects between the polar and rectangular representations. Now, if what you want is really to convert something to a number, then that's not really sufficient. And so the shortcut I selected is Shift 1 because there was this ASN label on it. Now, ASN historically on HP calculators means assign. Typically, it's to assign keys for user mode. And I thought that this is infrequent enough that it can go in a menu like the UI menu, and that I would use the keyboard shortcuts. ASN, I remember it, I recall it as number, but I think we are going to do a new generation of overlays where it's to num, so that it's more explicit that this is what the function is. And so when you do that, it forces the conversion to the decimal or numerical representation. So I think that's it for the functions that are not directly related to the main topic of this release. So let me go to equations, and let me first start by entering an equation myself. So I will follow another YouTuber very interested and very interesting regarding calculators on YouTube called Calculator Culture, and he always uses the full distance equation. So that's 4.9 times, so let me take the time squared, and that equals to the distance, or the height. Let me name the other variable h. Oops. So I'm sorry, I'm looking at my keyboard through the camera on the screen, so sometimes I'm mistyping. Sorry about that. So h, so that's my equation here. One minor or interesting thing about the cycle keys for equations, that's an aside, that's not related to the topic of solving them, is that it cycles between the display modes. So either all text mode or just a result in graphical mode and the main, the rest of the stack in text mode. And you see that I can cycle between the 4 possible modes like this. Okay, so let me use the solver menu here. And the first thing I can do is to store that in the equation with Shift F1. And so now that's the current equation I'm using. And if I use the solver menu here, then you see that the equation shows up at the top. So that's the equation being solved. And for all the variables, I have the name of the variable. The non-shifted entry, the one with the arrow on the left, is used to set the values of variables. The one with the question mark is to solve for that variable, and the one with the arrow on the left is to recall. So it's a bit reminiscent of how the variable menu works, where the unshifted value evaluates, and then you can recall and store with shift and two shifts. So back to my previous menu. And let me enter a value for h, for instance, 100 meters, and solve for t. So shift, oops, shift and F2, and that solves for t and gives me the result with a label that reminds me which variable I'm talking about here. And of course, I can do it the opposite way. So I can select, for instance, a value of 5 for t by simply hitting F2 and solve for h. And then I get the value for h. So that's pretty quick and convenient. And what is really new in this release is that this also applies to library equations, which are defined in the equations.csv file. So for now, it's relatively empty. There is only one submenu, physics, and you see that I have this relativity mass energy relation, E equals mc squared, which you may have heard of, and you can see that the c is displayed in bold, and that's because it's a constant. So constants are defined in the constants.csv file, and you can access them using the const menu here. And my c value is under phys, and you see the value of c here. So I can either put the c value on the stack. That's one example where toNum is useful, because now I can get the numerical value for it. And I can also directly get the numerical value by shifting, and I get the value for that equation directly. And you see that these constants have dimensions in them. So this is related to the units menu, which was the topic of a previous release, and we described it. So this is similar to speed. And so let me go to the speed menu, and I can convert that to feet per second, for instance, or to miles per hour. Now that's interesting. Why not? Ha, that's a bug. I need to investigate why. I suspect the MPH definition is bogus somewhere. Okay, I'll take a look at why we have this problem. So now I have this equation back to my library menu. So like for the constants, I can shift something and get the value directly. And you see that this equation is defined with units. And so it says that the value that I get, the energy is in joules and the mass is in kilograms. So if now I want to solve for that, I can shift twice and it directly gets me to the solving menu for that equation. So let me enter the value of, for instance, 10 for the mass. And because the unit is already given in the equation, so you see that the value being stored in the variable is 10 kilos. And if I record that with two shifts, that's what I see. The mass is 10 kilos. I can now solve for the energy for that. And you see that it's a pretty large number of joules that you get for 10 kilos of anything. So that's why antimatter propulsion is so useful for Star Trek spaceships, is because this gives a lot of energy with little matter. So that's how you can solve for units. Now the cycle command for unit objects. So in that case, it's a tagged unit object. So for tagged values, cycle tags, oh, sorry, cycle applies to the value inside the tag, but preserves the tag. And for unit object, it changes the scale of the unit. So for instance, here I'm going to shift to another size. It's going to find another size for units. So it's converting that to uh, an exact non-decimal value first, and then it's going to cycle through the possible units. Now, I don't know why it's so slow. It's not supposed to be that slow, so I suspect that something is inefficient in the way we pass the unit file, and I need to investigate that. But so that's an open issue for a next release to fix. So now I'm cycling through hectojoule and so on. It's going to go all the way up to megajoules, and I can go quicker to a size by going to the convert menu for units. And you see that, for instance, I can say, oh, I want to see what it gives in terajoules. So I shift to T. And I'm going to prefer the numerical value like this. So pretty large number of terajoules already. So I think that's about it for the solving function, but as you can see, it's already pretty useful as is, and I think we are almost on a par with what the HP48 and HP50 solver application does now. But please send me feedback on what you find. Let me try something else that I think is supposed to work, but I did not test it before doing this demo, so it might fail. So you see that I have this. So let me get back to the solver menu. So my M variable is in kilos, but normally I should be able to use another mass unit and it should convert automatically. So let me check. So let me say, for instance, if I have 10 grams, oops. So if I have 10 grams and I get back to my solver menu, if I store that to M, I think it should accept it and it converts to kilograms as expected. So that means that if I get my results, I don't know why it says no solution because it found it. Okay, so maybe a precision problem. But it looks like this is a correct solution because it's approximately 1000 times smaller than the one we had before, where we had 10 to the power 17. Okay, so I think there is another bug I need to look into. That's the spirit with this project is we keep going forward and making some progress. So I hope that you find this useful and that you can check it up a bit and tell me what you find. We'll see how we can improve this piece of software. Thanks a lot for your help and talk to you soon for the next demo.